thank you so much for watching my video. My name is Breezy and I am a yoga teacher. Now, I specialize in trauma-informed practices such as yoga, and one of the topics that has recently come up in one of my special groups that I work with called Sacred Spaces is healing the divine masculine. Now, this is an interesting topic because we hear a lot about the divine feminine, but not enough about the divine masculine. Now, before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. I would greatly appreciate you. You can also check out the show notes for a link to my website as well as yoga podcast, where I have over 400 episodes that you can listen to. So let's get started on today's episode. Now, what is the divine masculine? Now, before we go into that any deeper, I want to introduce something to you. Now, in yoga, we have what we call mudras. Mudras is literally yoga of the hands. And we do lots of different mudras. One that you are probably familiar with is when people are meditating and they take their hands into some sort of different variation. There's lots of different meanings for this. But one that we all recognize is prayer hands. Yep, prayer hands. This is a mudra. Now, in yoga, this has different meanings, but for today's video, we're going to talk about the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Now, however you self-identify, we all have the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And what I like to think of when I'm thinking about this is bringing your unconscious and your conscious sides together. So it's almost like thinking about your human experience and your spiritual awakening together. We all like to think that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, at least in the yoga world. So one of the other things that I love is using the acronym YOGA, and I hope that doesn't come up backwards on the video, but it's yoga and it's your own God awakening or goddess awakening, however you would like to utilize that. Well, this really does go into this idea of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Now, how do we heal the divine masculine? In our society, we are starting to notice this awakening of the divine feminine. That is being in touch with your feminine side, being in touch with your emotions, really living in the heart chakra space, maybe even the throat chakra. But the divine masculine reminds us of that solar plexus, that empowerment, that self-empowerment. But we tend to not focus on the divine masculine because we have these political ideas of the patriarchy, and there's some conflict between male identification and female identification, whether we're talking about this new concept of alpha men and this concept of submissive women. And although this video is not about that exactly, this is sort of the foundational spiritual side of that argument, perhaps. Now, as a woman, as a self-identified woman and female, I really like to lean into my feminine, my divine feminine side. But that doesn't mean that I need to leave the divine masculine by the wayside, right? What's important about yoga is all about balance. We balance on one leg all of the time. We're taking tree pose, or balancing, or we are also trying to create balance in life. Work, home, family, fun. And there's lots of ways of thinking about balancing. Well, the divine feminine and the divine masculine is included. Now, why do we need to heal the divine masculine? Well, as you've learned, it's a huge part of who you are. It is 1/2 part of your whole. So it's very important to identify with that. And why do we have trouble with it today? Well, some of that could be because of the leadership, the masculine energy. Masculine energy is all about getting things done. It's analytical. There's so many good things about it, but if we lean too far away from it, we start to think of it like toxic, right? Like there's this toxic idea that's attached itself to masculine energy or the divine masculine. And we need to heal that space. We need to give permission to ourselves to balance with that. Now, on the flip side, we also have people, including those who self-identify as women, who lean wholeheartedly on the masculine side, and they need to heal that divine feminine. But collectively, we have a divine masculine issue where we need to give permission to ourselves, all of us, to balance both. So there's a lot of ways that we can go about doing it. First is just acknowledging your shadow side, which I will talk about in the next video actually. Starting to heal your shadow side is just looking deep into the muck of self, like deep beneath the swamp of your own roots, and figuring out where you might have some issues. You know, issues with maybe even authority, issues with constructs, issues with things that seem to be really, I don't know, what's the word? Old-fashioned, right? So sometimes instead of just acknowledging the goodness about things that exist, we tend to push them away, and instead we hold on to other things causing an imbalance. Now, life needs to be like scales. There are times where things are like this and times where things are like this, but on average, we need to find this beauty in the balance. Yoga helps us to do that because it teaches us to be introspective. And as we begin to align our chakras, our energy centers, we inherently start to balance the unconscious with the conscious side, the human awareness with the spiritual awakening. We do not want to lean too far in any direction so that we can have a nice, gentle, calm disposition about our lives. So we're going to talk a lot about these topics on Love Breezy Bree. I hope you start to just think a little bit about your divine masculine side, your divine feminine side. Ask yourself if you're leaning too close to one or the other. Do you have any issues that you can think of in self-identity, or even just, wanting to be like too much of no against the divine masculine or too much of no against the divine feminine? Or do you have a healthy balance? A healthy balance looks like someone who can be in tune with their vulnerability, who can be appropriately emotional, who can also be appropriately, stoic, appropriately analytical, and be able to know when they can bring each side of themselves in. Now, I talked about this recently on Love Breezy Bree, as well as Yoga Podcast many times. We can only start to create this value in our lives if we create sacred space. So we might be asking too much of ourselves to immediately bring these two parts together if we don't feel safe to do so. If we have to hold down the fort in such a patriarchal leadership, just militant way, we're not going to be able to lean into our divine feminine. And if we're so leaned into our divine feminine where we are almost feministic, is that a word, feministic? I feel like that's a word. Where we are so leaning over here that we're saying no to everything over there. As you can see, we start to create conflict. We want peace. We want to be on a highest vibration of love. And we cannot get there if parts of us have this weird feeling about other parts of us, because it's all in us. It is all in us. So there's so much more to talk about, but thank you for listening thus far. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Go in peace. Namaste.